Now, the basic story of Slater's mill is that machines are always being improved upon. Last year's fine working machine becomes obsolete, is replaced by a better running machine. This is the carting engine, and this rugged old machine ran from around 1870 right up until 1972. Then people in the newly organized OSHA, worker safety, got fussy, said you couldn't use these machines with the rollers out in the open. Because, well, let's say a man is loading this machine with cotton fiber to be carted in the rollers, and that cotton fiber brushes his sleeve down. How easy it could be for his sleeve to get caught in the rollers, pull his hand in and his arm up to the shoulder. Or a lady, she has pulled back her long hair to work on this machine. Maybe just a few strands of her hair get loose and get caught in the rollers. You can imagine the terrible accidents that could and did happen with this machine. But it must have been pretty efficient if they kept it running for over 100 years. You see how the belt is put together with leather bits to make it more supple because it's going to take all these turns. And the other side of the machine produces a substance called cotton sliver. Notice the cotton fiber is getting closer and closer to something we recognize as yarn or thread. But when I handle it, see what's floating around in the air? You can see in the sunlight? Cotton fiber getting in my eyes, up my nose. Breathing that in can bring on a condition called brown lung, because the workers in the mill were coughing up a brown, frothy substance from inhaling these cotton fibers. They get caught in the bronchial passages, they're not going to be flushed out. So the mill owners, in their infinite wisdom, would keep the windows in the mill nailed shut, even on the hot, muggy days, because if the windows are shut, the air currents aren't going to be blowing around those cotton fibers quite so much. People wouldn't breathe them in as much. Also, if it's hot and humid in here, that humidity, that moisture is going to make the machines run better, because the damp cotton will more readily spin. This machine is from 1922. It's an English machine. This is a drawing frame. This sliver has to be made even softer. So it's going to be drawn through these rollers from the barrel in the back. Of course, by 1922, the mill owners no longer had to build their mills next to a river, because by that time they had another source of power, another source of current for their machines. They had electric power. Let's see if we can get this one running. In this form, the cotton kind of resembles soft serve ice cream. Coming from barrels in the back, passing through the rollers, it's being smoothed out, it's being drawn, the fibers are being pulled. Just like that. And another machine will spin that sliver into roving. All right, now it looks like thread, it looks like yarn. But it's fragile, you see. Breaks easily until you take two strands of the roving that comes from the sliver, twist them together 3 or 4 times, and it won't break anymore. And that is how natural cotton yarn and thread are manufactured in the mill, by combining 2 or 3 strands of this roving into one tight, thin, strong, usable thread, the final product. Arkwright water frame. Now this is another replica. The original machine is in the mill in Belper, England, which is now a museum. Well, Richard Arkwright and his partners, one of whom was Jedediah Strutt, were working on these automatic spinning machines. By automatic, I mean they're water-powered. What it will do is grab 2 strands of this looser yarn called roving, combine them in the rollers into the yarn, which passes down here through these rings and is wound around the bobbins in the front. These spools are called bobbins. And in back is a wooden spinning bar that would be water-powered. The spinning bar serves to elevate and lower the front frame so the 8 spools, the 8 bobbins in the front, are evenly wound with yarn. Legend has it that Samuel Slater, when he came over here from England, to show he knew what he was talking about, Samuel Slater built an Arkwright water frame from memory, borrowing parts from imperfectly running machines. He had to know the spacing, the weight of all the gears. He not only rebuilt it, he had improved its original design. Right, let's move down here, please. Now this is the last machine from Samuel Slater's life, 1835. This is called a throstle spinner. It's named after the thrush or thrush, which is an English songbird. What it does is it grabs the two strands of the looser yarn called roving, and of course this would be loaded on both sides, combines them in these rollers into the yarn. You see it's two lines, then it's become one line. Flips it over, pulls it, gives it like a braid, pulls it to just the right tautness, then that yarn travels through rings and is wound around the bobbins in front. And this is Samuel Slater's contribution to the machine's design, the heart-shaped cam gear. There are 4 on the machine. This replaced the clunky wooden spinning bar, less breakage of thread. What it does is it pushes up and lowers the frame, so the frame is always in motion, being evenly wound with the yarn. Now the lady who ran this machine was called a bobbin girl. She may be 17 years of age, and if she performed her duties in the mill very well, she would be rewarded. Not with any increase in pay, they would just give her another machine to run. Now working with the bobbin girls were bobbin doffers. Bobbin doffers were spool changers. Now these could be girls of 6, 7, 8 years old, too small to run the big machines, but they could help out as spool changers, bobbin doffers. They would reach in while the machine is running, stop the brackets from spinning, extract the spools. When they're full with thread, replace them with the empty ones to be wound. Now, of course, it was originally water-powered. But you see how this is flowing down. Two strands combining in the rollers. Two lines, then it's become one line of yarn which goes around the bobbin. So the bobbin girls and the bobbin doffers are stopping these brackets from spinning, pulling out the spools, replacing them with empty ones to be wound. They would start changing the spools when the rod drops into the divot there. That's when the frame's at its lowest point. That brings us over to the next machine, which is the noisiest and possibly the most dangerous in our collection. This was built in Manchester, England in 1909. This is a spinning mule. The spinning mule replaced the throstle spinner that replaced the Arkwright water frame because it's more efficient. This can spin 64 lines of thread at the same time. What it does is as the carriage extends, go over the rudders, it draws on this looser yarn combined in the now steel rollers into the thread. We'll call it thread now because it's thinner. Then as the carriage travels back over the rudders more rapidly, that thread is wound around cardboard tubes fit over the spindles. As the name connotes, these spindles spin around. Now if I leave this lever back, it would run all day and into the evening. We'll do one pass with it. Now if any of that yarn breaks or that thread breaks, somebody has to get back there, usually behind the carriage, tie a little weaver's knot to keep that traveling. I'm not going to go back there. I'm too big and clumsy. I might not get up excuse me, before the carriage slams back on me. But a 7 or 8 year old child should have no trouble ducking underneath the carriage or climbing over the rail and getting out of the way of the carriage before it slams back. At least that's the way it was originally done. And the mule spinner would send his children back there because they were accustomed to it. But it is a very efficient machine. Let us pretend that there are 64 lines of thread being spun at the same time. See, this one uses rope and leather belts to pull us. Keep in mind, this is an English machine. All right, let's say some of those 64 strands of thread are broken. Somebody's going to go back there, tie a little weaver's knot. We send a little Bobby over here, a little Sarah over there. They've got plenty of time, right? All right, Bobby, you better think you're getting out of there now. Sarah, climb out before. I'm sure little Bobby and Sarah made it out in time, most of the time. Which brings us over to the draper loom. And we don't turn on this machine because it has 2 broken harnesses. The frames are called the harnesses. They just snap with age. And you can see where the imperfection in the weaving came out. I have seen it run. This is another form of loom, making the cloth at this stage. The shuttles are hammered back and forth under this bar at 80 miles an hour. If a shuttle happens to break loose from the machine, well, that's why the screen is here. Otherwise, these could embed themselves in a concrete wall at the other side of the mill. We've had 2 eyewitnesses attest to that. Now, another danger with this machine, and I don't want to overemphasize the dangers because it was a fine running machine, But the way it would be loaded, well, this is a newer shuttle. It's probably only about 120 to 130 years old. And the thread is pulled through a divot to load it and fasten it onto the machine. But the older ones, you would slide the bobbin onto the spindle, clamp it in place, and then the thread has to pass through this white ceramic disc. The only practical way to do that is to put one's mouth up against the wood and suck the thread through. They say it makes a kissing sound when they would do that. Now, wood's a porous material. Heaven forbid the person using this before you had tuberculosis or influenza or cholera, any number of communicable diseases of the 19th century. Hence, they started to call this the kiss of death. There was a young lady who worked on this machine, well, this type of machine. Her name was Mary Kenyon, and I believe she was 15 years old at the time. It was after the Civil War. One of Mary Kenyon's co-workers kept a journal, and she had written down, Mary Kenyon has had a misfortune. She was working on her power loom, placed her finger where it had no business, and so the loom in turn snapped it off. That cost Mary Kenyon the first half of her right index finger, and it ruined Mary's week in the mill. But then she came back to work. But that's why we remember Mary Kenyon today. Over here, well, this is a narrow fabric loom from 1899, and we can think of this as one of the first electric-powered computers. I call it a computer because it has a program. It has a binary code. Okay? Now this is making what might be lanyards to wear a sign around your neck, or bookmarks as we sell in the gift shop, or men's suspenders. We have this program to spell out Slater Mill. You see, for every X someone penned in this chart, someone placed a pin in sequence in these slats. That's the program. You see, we're having this one service to restrung, and that's complicated. We're having a specialist come in from Worcester. See, this is a 9-harness loom. And the thread has to be meticulously passed through eyelets in the wire heddles. One of these machines, when it's running, it has a nice rhythm. You could dance to it as the shuttles swing back and forth. But you would have to imagine 200 of these machines all running at once, because that's what they had in the mill in Lowell, Massachusetts. 200 of these narrow fabric looms running at once. You've heard of the maypole dance, where on May Day, May 1st, the children wrap colored ribbons around a pole, they'll duck under each other's arms, and they sing, "Go in and out the window." Well, that gave somebody the idea for putting together a pretty efficient braiding machine. Now this is making a braided cord such as that from which I suspend my key. This could be box ties, bootlace or shoelace. Then in the 1880s and 1890s, when electricity started to come into the homes and workplaces, one could insert a copper wire through a funnel and you'd have your first insulated electric cord. Now this was steam powered and pulley operated, but they would use this crank to get it started in the morning when they were loading it with fresh spools, fresh bobbins. So you can think of these bobbins as maypole dancers or square dancers joining hands and do-si-doing. Well, somebody had to invent a machine that ran faster and better, more continuous. And we have the high-speed braider. This machine is from 1923. And there's a company in Central Falls, Rhode Island that still uses 12 of these machines to make braided cord, because if you maintain them, they're going to keep running. Now these machines would be left running overnight, and in the morning the foreman would come in and he'd tie up whatever threads had snapped, because if one thread breaks, the entire machine will stop. It will go plunk and just stop spinning. That's a safety feature for the machine, so that it won't be destroyed by tangled thread overnight. And it's kind of complicated to restring it. Now, if you ever had an electric train set or heard one, you'll know this sound. So they're left running overnight. High-speed braider from the 1920s. This is a circular knitter from the year 1891. And Tompkins Brothers, who manufactured this machine, made it fancy, like big weighing scale, because we were told this was in a storefront window being demonstrated. What it does is it's making a circular fabric or a tube of fabric without the stitching, without the seam in the side. This could be sweatshirt and t-shirt material. Here's an example. It was knit on the machine. Look at that. Inside the baskets are hook and elbow pins. They look like tiny harpoons. See, they have the hook. And they're doing the darning or knitting that formerly would have been done by hand. See the complexity of this machine. See, it draws the thread from the skeins, the thread, up to the cylinders, and these turn around and spin. Now, finally, we are up to 1957. And this machine is making argyle pattern socks. It can make the half circle for the heel, but the toes are left open with this machine because it knits out the socks in a tube and then a strand in sequence and a tube. So if Dad worked with a sock knitter such as this in the mill, he could bring home with him a bag stuffed with maybe 200 of these socks with the toes open. At home, Mom and the children could spend some hours at homework, piecework. They would stitch the toes closed, and they could earn half a penny for every sock they sewed closed. It only made sense to do a pair, that way you get a penny. But that added up to good soda money in the 1950s. And that way the mill owner could say, no, we don't have children working in our mill. We give people overtime after 8 hours. Because enough of their workers were willing to take home this incentive work, get a little extra cash on the side. It benefited both mill owner and mill worker. Well, we look back, you can almost see the workers tending their machines. The people who worked in this mill when it was a cotton spinning mill must have thought the cotton spinning industry would always be rooted here in southern New England, because this was a thriving boom town. Then almost as quickly as that industry came into the Blackstone Valley, it started to move away, once they no longer needed that river to power their machines. In 1890, Pawtucket celebrated the Cotton Centennial, 100 years of cotton manufacture in Pawtucket. But even then, the mill owners knew something was about to change. That industry started to move down to the south, where the cotton was grown, down to the Carolinas, Alabama, and Georgia. But this building saw different industries over the years. For a time, they manufactured wooden parts for ships, and later there was a steamboat industry here. I've seen a picture of their sign. In the 1870s, there was a quaint business called coffin trimmings here in Slater Mill. They manufactured coffin trimmings, satin coffin trimmings for the linings of coffins for all over the country. Then in the 1890s, pretty much everybody in Rhode Island who owned a bicycle had bought their bicycle at Sterling Bicycle Shop. That was in a building that was right outside where the lot is now, and people could try their bicycles on a ramp upstairs. So it was different businesses right up until 1921, the last two businesses left. What was supposed to happen is Slater Mill was going to be pulled down, leveled, and they would erect that bronze patina plaque outside that designates this as the site of the first successful cotton spinning mill in America. Fortunately, it was a direct descendant of Samuel Slater's, Horatio Nelson Slater, named after Samuel Slater's eldest son. I believe he was Samuel Slater's great-great-great-great-grandson. And Horatio Nelson Slater spearheaded the effort to restore these buildings and maintain the grounds as a museum complex. Creates a little village of history. Well, I believe some of you want to go on and see the Sylvanus Brown house, if you haven't seen it. Or you can take the tour all over again if you'd like. That is getting later in the day. But thank you very much for visiting us in Slater's Mill.
Thank you.
Thank you.